Welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sara.
And we like to start things off on a high note in this podcast, but mine is not actually a high note. It also is, but Sara, I'm a terrible mother.
Why are you a terrible mother, Lily?
It was Sif's birthday today, and I didn't even realize until I opened up the calendar to start this podcast recording.
I mean, that's better than me and my good thing for this week, which is that it was Snorri's gotcha day 2 days ago, and I didn't remember until now. So you're one up over me.
I do know how to make calendar events. That's true. That gives me +1 mother point.
I have just been relying on remembering that it's sometime in July and then going back into my photos to see if I can grab the date from the first picture I took of him, which is not very effective, surprisingly.
Well, Sif doesn't look like she's taken it too hard. She is currently rolling around on her back and stretching her little feets out. For context, Sif is a cat. I assume everyone knows that, but just in case.
You mean you didn't forget your human child's birthday?
Oh boy, if I had a human child whose birthday I forgot, there would be other issues. Like not knowing I had a human child. I feel like that would take precedence.
Surprise!
Oh boy, what is this, Sleeping Beauty? Anyway, my good thing is actually that my sweet baby kitten is not actually a baby or a kitten. And she is a whole, 3 years old? I think she has just turned 3 or 4, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I started nodding and then realized that podcast listeners can't actually hear that.
So we've got some sweet fuzzy animals, and they are good, and they make life good.
They do, even when they have huge vet bills and cost me lots of money.
Well, speaking of medical bills, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm not drinking anything that will send me to the hospital or cause me to have medical bills.
Oh, I was making fun of how terrible medical bills are and how they drive one to drink.
Oh, I was thinking that you were referring to the fact that alcohol is bad for your liver.
Oh, nah.
I am actually drinking tea today because another good thing that happened this week was I ran out of a particular blend called Divinity from Teas with Meaning, which is an Oakland company that I discovered. And I went on their website and they didn't have any Divinity, like it wasn't listed on their site. So I reached out to them on Instagram. I think it's one woman who runs it, and said, hey, I just used up the last of my tea. I really enjoy it, but I don't see it on the site. Like, are you still making it? Could you let me know when it's going to be back in stock? And she said, oh, I'll just send you some. It'll be back on the website in the fall, but I'll just send you some. And I said, okay, but like, how should I pay? If we're doing this through Instagram and not on the website, like, how do I make sure that you get paid for your tea? And she's like, no, I'll just, don't worry about it. So she was very lovely, and the tea is very good. And that's what I'm drinking tonight. Teas with Meaning.
Well, and we all know you're going to order some when it is back in stock, so it's not like she missed out on a sale.
She will probably get a larger sale than she would have otherwise, to be honest.
And that's good marketing.
Indeed. And what are you drinking tonight, Lily?
Jose out of a box.
The good old standard.
Yep. My usual box wine brand is local, which I harp on to make it sound fancier than just coming out of a cardboard box, but it still is.
I mean, I think the local supersedes the cardboard boxitude.
Why, thank you. And since this is, of course, a reading podcast, you done any of that?
I have. I read Victory is Greater Than Death by Charlie Jane Anders, which I believe that I've mentioned on a previous podcast. I think I mentioned it when we were talking about The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And I really enjoyed it. Anders has watched a lot of Doctor Who, and you can kind of tell because it feels very similar to how a Doctor Who episode feels, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I get that completely.
Yeah. Yeah. You would probably call it space fantasy, but you would also appreciate the diversity of alien races. And something that I thought was really cool was there's an explanation for why there's a lot of human-shaped alien races.
I do like that. Is it a seeding race that went through and sprinkled genetics throughout the universe? I feel like
No.
that's the go-to.
No.
Oh, wonderful. All of this is great news.
Yeah. I don't want to go any further into it because I don't want to spoil it, but I thought that the explanation was unique and appropriate, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how things play out in the next book.
Very exciting.
And I know that you have actually had a chance to read things other than podcast stuff for once.
I have. I already spoke about it / will speak about it. Time is an illusion, and we are recording these episodes out of order. I recently read a romance novel. I found it on Twitter, not someone we know, so I don't have to be too worried about this. I'm still not going to name names because I'm perhaps not going to be extremely flattering, but there was a free preview on Kindle, so I thought, well, heck, why not? And then it was terrible. But it was also free on Kindle Unlimited, so I thought, heck, why not? And I finished it, so...
So, I mean, even if you enjoyed it for reasons maybe that the author hadn't intended, you've still enjoyed it enough to finish it.
Yeah, it wasn't all bad. It had this thing, and I've noticed this in other romance novels, where the main character has to be exceedingly shy, and not just in interpersonal interactions, because that's fine. Some people are shy when in dealing with other people, but when dealing with sex, which is clearly the whole point of the book, like it's right there on the back cover. We all know what we're here for.
I think there's a place for having characters who are shy when it comes to sex, but you want to see variety, right?
And it's not the character's internal reaction, it's the book itself shying away from mentioning it straight out. Like, there are actual sex scenes in this book later on, but earlier on, it uses, like, cutesy euphemisms, and that is just... Like, what are you doing? Who do you think you're fooling? We all know where this is going.
Was it specifically an erotica book or just a romance book?
I don't know what the distinction would be.
I mean, I think, at least personally, I don't know if this is how anyone else views these terms, but for me, erotica means there's going to be lots of blatant sex and explicit sex, and romance doesn't necessarily, like, romance might have a fade to black.
There was only one interaction of this variety, but it was very explicit.
So I'd say that maybe still qualifies as romance, though.
But if you're going to be explicit in one scene, why are you...
Yeah, you might as well be explicit in other scenes.
Yeah.
Were the other scenes with the main love interest?
It was the book refused to acknowledge the existence of sex until it was happening. I mean, that's my complaint. But, like, it's not that it happened earlier and faded to black and we only saw it happen once. That would be fine. That's just a pacing choice. But when there is explicit sex later, you don't have to use cutesy euphemisms for it earlier on. Like, I don't know. I'm not explaining it very well. I did read this a couple days ago now, so this isn't super fresh. There are a couple of instances that I'm going to complain about explicitly in the pet peeve section of this episode.
But I think I get what you're saying, is that if you're going to show explicit sex later on, you can directly reference the fact that these characters are having sex, like, earlier on, right?
But they weren't having sex earlier on.
Oh, it was just when talking about sex?
Yeah, and not the characters, because again, characters have verbal tics or whatever. Like, the book itself was scared to acknowledge that adults sleep together until it happened.
Okay. That's an odd choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, It also promised me someone on the run from the law, but was actually just family drama, and I was supposed to find it charming that her family was super nosy, and that is not my vibe at all. So that was just annoying for the entire book.
That feels like a bit of a letdown.
Yeah. This author's idea of on the run, I guess not from the law, from an organized crime, whatever.
Was her family the mafia?
No, she lived out of town from home. And so when she got into trouble, she went back to visit her family. And so the whole book was family drama. And then also there was one scene at the very end. Again, one scene at the very end where she gets kidnapped. And of course, love interest saves her because duh. But the entire book was her mom going, "Oh, someone saw you at the gas station with a boy today." And I have no patience for that shit.
I'm sorry that ended up being a bit of a disappointment.
I read it. How much of a disappointment was it really?
That's very true. So a while back, we asked on Twitter, or I asked on Twitter, for suggestions of books that we should cover on the podcast. And Crystal Matar, Crystal Matar, author of Legacy of the Brightwash and friend of the show and all-around wonderful person, suggested that we read Smuggler's Fortune by Angela Boord. So
wait, did she actually suggest that we read Smuggler's Fortune? Or did she just suggest that we read this series?
If I recall correctly, she mentioned both Smuggler's Fortune and Fortune's Fool. Fortune's Fool is the first book in the series, although Smuggler's Fortune takes place chronologically before it. But Fortune's Fool is like 700 pages, and our calendar was already pretty full. So I thought, Lily's going to go for the 170-page book, not the 700-page book.
I mean, that's correct. But, oh boy, I don't know about you, but I was definitely missing out on background information here.
So Smuggler's Fortune does technically stand alone, but
does it?
I mean, I think you can enjoy it without having read I'm only about 25% of the way through Fortune's Fool, but there's a note at the beginning of the book that Angela wrote that says, you probably should read Fortune's Fool first. And I got there to that note and I was like, oops.
And it was correct. I enjoyed Smuggler's Fortune, but I definitely felt in over my head 90% of the time.
There was some context that I think that I got because I have read some of the first book, but I think that, and I like I said, I really enjoyed this book, but I think that it would have benefited from having read the first book first. Surprise, surprise.
I will say, anytime there was a place or family name in this book, my brain went, okay, it's the family, and they're doing politics stuff. Moving on.
I mean, I think that you were probably right about that. There are a lot of families doing politicking stuff.
And it didn't matter which one was which luckily it didn't, because if it did matter, I would have been completely lost. But there were so many place names and family names in this very, very short book. It was not, that was not a good ratio.
It would have helped to be more familiar with the setting. I will say, though, that it's kind of like a magical Venice that Fortune's Fool at least starts in. And it's great. I love the setting.
Yeah, and honestly, none of that, like I said, interfered with my reading of the book, of this novella in particular. Is it a novella? I think it's just a short novel, right?
I have a very nebulous understanding of where a short story versus a novella versus short novel have their boundaries.
There's an actual word count.
Kindle said it was 170 pages.
Page is not how cutoffs work.
Oh, you mean there's a word count for what makes a novella?
Yes.
I see.
I think a novella is only 40,000 words, which is pretty short. Or I should say that's the line where it switches over.
As someone who does not write, I look at word count and just think that's a big number. So I have no actual context for like a word count really means.
It doesn't matter anyway. It's a good book. It doesn't take that long to read. I would say the ratio of specific place location words to other words is too high for the length of the book. Whether it's a book or a novella doesn't matter. But like I said, I muddled through. I completely glazed over any time any word that was not in English happened. And it didn't affect my understanding. Wow, surprise, different families don't like each other. Luckily, they all started with a different letter, so I didn't actually have to internalize what their names were.
That's true.
Yeah, like, oh, okay, this is the family that starts with an A. All right.
I just got very hungry when I read this book. There are a lot of descriptions of food, and I was like, I want to eat this.
Oh my god, dolma does sound really good though, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, other than this book having a lot of places and family names that I did not register on any level, the main character is a woman who is masquerading as a man, which I have read more than one YA novel written for girls in my life, and so therefore have a huge soft spot for that narrative.
Yes. But one thing that I like about this is that I feel like in a lot of YA novels that feature the same plot point, the female character is very enthusiastic about dressing as a man.
Whereas in this book, it was more of a necessary evil.
Yeah, exactly. Like, she's not necessarily doing it by choice so much as like that's what makes the most sense for her. And she's not entirely sure that she wants to continue doing it. Like, she kind of wants to settle down and have a family. So it was nice to see a character like grapple with those questions.
That's a great point. I'm not sure if the books I read when I was younger were just from a different era or written for a different age group, but it definitely felt more like the women involved were running towards something, and so they dressed as men instead of running from something.
They were going on an adventure.
Yeah. Well, they wanted the opportunities available for men in their society, and that was the whole thing, right? Whereas in this, it's much less, yay, this is going to get me what I want, but more, this is necessary to survive.
Yeah, like I said, I like that distinction.
It feels like a much more thoughtful exploration of that. Pretending to be something you're not must get tiring. And I don't think that really comes up in YA novels.
It also brings up a lot of the issues that you have when you want to form like interpersonal relationships, because you can't necessarily have a physical relationship with someone unless you disclose that you're a woman, and you spend all of your time lying to your closest companions.
Ooh, I really did like Rozzy. Rozzy? That's probably his name, right?
That's how I pronounce it.
And he was the sort of flirt interest, I'm going to say. Not love interest, but there was definitely overtures between them.
There was physical attraction between them.
That I have opinions we're going to get into later.
I have opinions too.
But I really did like it. Maybe it's just...
He was a bit of a charming rogue.
And he was shamelessly hitting on this dude. That's fun. Just because we know Kira?
That's how I pronounce it.
I didn't even know if that was how it was spelled. Okay. Just because the reader knew that Kira was a woman, Rozzy didn't. It did kind of remind me of that joke about Mulan, how that movie must have been a bi-awakening for that guy who decides he's in love with Mulan and then finds out she's a woman.
Yes.
And how that doesn't get explored at all.
But I would watch that movie. I would love to see that explored. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Rozzy doesn't go through a crisis. He clearly already knows who he's interested in and doesn't seem to care too much either way.
Yeah.
But it just reminded me of that joke. Oh boy. I originally wrote that I have a soft spot for Rozzy, but then I started giggling because it's really much more of a hard-on. And then, why are those phrases so similar, but so different at the same time?
Raise a good point there.
Yeah, that's just funny. Soft and hard, meaning the same thing. Also, he was excellent.
He was excellent. He has not shown up in Fortune's Fool yet, but I hope that he does.
I'm assuming that's because I'm supposed to like Kira's actual love interest more than him. And reading this book first was a mistake, if that's where I'm supposed to go.
I think that's just because you have a very low tolerance for this kind of pining.
Right. So Razi is extremely into Kira, or Kiris, as her male name in the book is. And she turns him down, which makes sense, like you said, because she's trying to portray herself as a man, and that would be a little difficult in that kind of scenario. But that's never the narrative that she brings up. I don't think this is a spoiler because it comes up very early in this novella, but she has some old flame that she's just thinking about the whole time. And that's always the reason that she brings up for not being able to take Razi up on his advances. And that did not sit well with me at all.
I mean, but she's not emotionally attracted to Razi necessarily. Like,
I don't think that's true at all.
She's physically attracted to him, and she likes him. I mean, like, I think that there could be an emotional attraction that develops, but I think that her reaction to him at this point is mostly physical. And I can see why she would prioritize the stronger emotional connection over something that might not go, beyond the physical.
They save each other's lives. If there's an emotional connection that creates an emotional connection.
Just because you save someone's life doesn't mean that you have the depth of emotional connection needed to supersede the emotional connection that she has with her old flame, as you call him.
I forgot his name. That's how little I cared about him.
I mean, he doesn't actually show up in the book. He's just mentioned, so.
His name is just on every fucking page. And I'm supposed to care about this guy. And I'm like, oh, great. He's keeping her from being happy. Sure hope that's worth it.
I think like I said, I think you just have a very low tolerance for this kind of connection.
Okay.
When you don't know the character.
Well, yeah, I sure don't know that character. Maybe it's different because you've read presumably something about him in the actual novel.
Yeah, he has. They don't have a romantic relationship yet. So I guess in that sense, Smuggler's Fortune was a little bit of a spoiler, except that we follow. I mean, like, Angela's wonderful, and we follow her on Twitter, and like it's all over the Twitter that that he's the love interest. So
okay, but I think, or the impression that I got, is that Kira didn't allow herself to form a romantic connection with Razi because she felt like that was cheating on this guy. That was always the phrasing that she brought up was, oh, I really like him. He's really great, but I can't let this evolve. I have to shut myself off from him because this douchebag might still be alive.
I think calling him a douchebag is a little harsh.
That's just my interpretation.
I mean, I think I really cared about Arsenal, and I am not really over the fact that he might be dead, and I don't want to form a relationship with anyone until I confirm that he is dead or not. And I can understand not wanting to move on.
You don't have to move on. If it had been that they left each other with promises of fidelity, then I would completely understand wanting to be loyal to that. Like, I'm not questioning that at all.
Not everyone wants just like sex without strings.
But she did want that with Razi, and then said, oh, but I can't, because that wouldn't be fair to this guy who's probably not even alive.
I mean,
like, in the book, she said she wanted it, but wouldn't allow herself to have it.
Well, she said that she wanted sex, but like, I don't think that she wanted just like, I think that if she had sex, she would have wanted to form a relationship, and she's not ready for that.
Maybe. But then I have no sympathy for her being sad and horny because, girl, you're doing that to yourself.
I mean,
because a lot of the book is her being, wow, I'm so sad and horny. I hope my boyfriend's not dead. Well, there's a solution right in front of you, who is excellent, I might add. I think it felt like Razi was being dangled in my face as the reader. And like, that was like a little unfair. Come on. Don't give me this really extremely wonderful a pan or bisexual man and not let me enjoy it at all.
Maybe he gets a love interest in Fortune's Fool, and then you
I
get
hope so.
all of it.
Really, the reason why this was so frustrating to me was because Boord created this character that I, as a reader, was super into, and it felt like a tease. So really, it's just a compliment for how well done and extremely sexy Rozzy was. But there was also Nebus, who was the other of this trio of mercenaries, which is the plot of this book. I don't think we brought up at all, really.
I don't think we've talked about the plot of the book at all.
It really does feel more like character banter taken to the nth degree, and I was into it from the beginning, clearly. The action was great. Like I said, 3 mercenaries signing on to defend this cart of goods. Shenanigans, that's not fair. High-octane adventure and drama ensues. But the third guy that's traveling with them, Nebus, is just Kira's old friend, who only knows her as a man also. But their friendship was really wonderful. And at one point, Nebus asks her, "How do I know you're not going to betray us or something?" Right? Because they're mercenaries and they're very genuinely just doing this for money. And she kind of just looks at him and says, "How long have you known me?" Or "How long have we been friends?" Or something like that. And he's like, "Yeah, okay." And I really loved that moment of, he has to ask because that's good practices. But that answer was enough for him. Like, that was really like genuine and sweet, and I loved it.
They had a really great relationship, and I think Angela is really, really good at character work and creating these characters who have believable relationships with each other and just a lot of depth to them and really bring the story to life.
I was trying to come up with a why you should read this book for this book, and my initial response was, don't. I mean, not don't read her work, but like...
Read Fortune's Fool first.
Is that the other one? Yeah.
Yes.
Read the actual one. But if you're on the fence, 700 pages is a lot. And if you don't know if you want to commit that much time to something, I do think this was probably like a great exposure to, like you said, the way her characters fit together and this world building and the narrative style. So if you want to give a little taste test, I would say read this book. If you don't mind just committing the time, which that's a lot of reading.
It's a bit of a chonker.
I don't know what kind of reader you are, theoretical listener, but read this if you want to be convinced to read more. How's that? That's why you should read this book.
Yes.
Otherwise, read it in the middle, like you're supposed to. Don't do what we did.
Read it in the proper order.
Yeah, don't do it. I kind of feel like returning to my silly over-the-top intro for Journey to the Center of the Discworld.
I think you should do it.
It's been a little while, and now it's funny to me again. And that's what really matters, isn't it?
That is all that really matters.
Well, in that case, hello, and welcome back to this continued journey to the center of the Discworld. We are taking another step. Did I already say step? I might have. I'm saying it again.
I don't think that you've said step yet.
Well, now I'll say it for a second or third time. Take a step with us. Up the steps on the side of a pyramid to read Pyramids by Terry Pratchett, the somethingeth number in his Discworld series. 6? You're checking the front of the book as if they're in order.
They are in order.
Oh, they're not on mine.
They are in order.
Jelly.
7, I believe.
Dude, mine lists guards first.
Really?
Yeah.
In the books by Terry Pratchett? Do we have the same edition?
Clearly not. Hold on. Where'd my book go? Oh, just kidding. Books by Terry Pratchett lists the carpet people first.
Yeah, because it's his non-Discworld books that come first.
So for the Discworld series, it lists making money first. Oh, I think it might go in opposite order.
Interesting.
That's confusing.
So we don't have the same edition.
Well, clearly not.
Clearly.
But yeah, it for like fantastic
Interesting.
equal rights. Yeah, so it's just printed in opposite order, which is not helpful, can I say?
I mean, you figured it out eventually.
Only because I knew what order they were supposed to go in. If you saw these in a bookstore and were like, well, I'll grab the first Discworld book, I'll check the front to see what the first one is, would not help.
That's true, but we also do argue that you shouldn't start at the beginning. So maybe it's not that bad.
That's true, but it gives you no frame of reference. No wonder it's so hard to figure out where to start in Discworld, because like there's no help at all, except for our episode. Go listen to it. I have to start with a mini words are weird.
What is your Discworld related words are weird?
In this book, Tepic, the main character, begins the novel studying to become an assassin. And I really love the way Pratchett does his guild system. There's a guild of assassins, and we'll talk about that later. But he mentions edificing as one of the things he was learning. And I was so confused because the word edification means to learn, but edificing or to edificer is to scale a wall or something was the best I could tell from context clues in this book. But those are clearly the same root word. Was that a pun that I just didn't get?
I mean, I think it has to do with edifice being like a big building.
Okay. But edifice as a thing you do, well, I guess edification is not a verb. I was going to say as a verb. But that's how I have, like, that's the word I know. And so it was baffling to me.
Edificing is certainly not a word that one sees every day. Partially because I think that Terry Pratchett made it up, but...
Was it supposed to be a pun on edification? Because it's 90% the same letters, okay?
I'm saying that I don't think it has anything to do with edification. I think it has to do with edifice. Big building.
Well, then he made up a bad word because it's confusing.
But like they're climbing walls, like they're climbing buildings.
Right, but if he didn't want me to think of edification, he shouldn't have picked a word that was 99% the same as it. There are other words that mean big buildings.
I mean, I think that's just in English is weird and has too many, like, close words.
And that is why that was my mini words are weird. Thank you for joining. Okay, guilds in Ankh-Morpork. Love them. Love it so much. I love okay, I just thought about that for more than 30 seconds and realized that I'm saying I love organized crime, which I don't. But there's something about the system in Ankh-Morpork which is so fun and whimsical to me.
I do have to stop you there, just really quick.
Yes.
Because once again, we have a difference in pronunciation where I say Ankh-Morpork and you're saying Ankh-Morpork. And I just find that very interesting.
Yeah, I go back and forth. Maybe I go back and forth because I'm talking to you, but it is probably pronounced Ankh. I will keep that in mind going forward.
I mean, I don't know if my pronunciation is right, and my default pronunciation for things very often is incorrect.
But it's spelled the same.
Yeah.
So it's probably pronounced the same.
That doesn't stop English from being English.
It's not English, though, is it?
Well, it's Ankh-Morporkian.
Yeah, okay.
Discworldian.
Well, I meant an Ankh is not an English.
I'm not talking about Ankh as in the Egyptian symbol. I'm talking about Ankh as in Ankh-Morpork.
Again, if Terry Pratchett did not want me to associate these two words, he should not have used the exact same word.
I mean, that's why I pronounce it Ankh-Morpork.
You know what I wouldn't say I misread, but the first time I read this book, I didn't even attempt to read this word because it's a nonsense word. And that's fine. Terry Pratchett has a lot of nonsense words. But when I was reading it for this podcast and realized I was going to have to say it out loud, I was a little bit more thoughtful in my reading and realized that the name of the country this particular novel takes place in is Jelly Baby.
Yes, it is.
It's spelled DJELIBEYBI.
That's still Jelly Baby.
It's definitely Jelly Baby. Did not catch that first time around. Didn't look that hard. Probably should have.
I mean, he does have a footnote that talks about it.
Yeah, I think you mentioned off air that I didn't have the reference to the candy because that's not a thing we have. But with Doctor Who and all of that nonsense, I now have a frame of reference. I noticed the connection this time.
Yeah.
But that was funny. I noted it down.
It's always nice to reread a book and find new things in it.
It is. And I do think I've been finding fun new things as we're going through this reread. You probably less so, since you've reread these more often and more recently than me.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm still enjoying rereading them. I don't think that I could ever get tired of rereading Pratchett. Well, maybe Mort. I can maybe get tired of rereading Mort.
I will say, when was this book written?
It was published in 1989, I believe.
We have to address the cringy racism.
There's a little bit of racism.
It's not funny, Pratchett.
Yeah.
I don't care if you think it is, it's not. You can't refer to someone wearing towels on their head who lives in a... Okay, sure, not on Earth, but like we all know which cultures you're trying to mirror here and being really rude about it.
Yeah, that bits of Pratchett in this book did not age well. There's not a lot of it, but there is some.
There are just a couple of lines.
Yeah.
It feels like he plays off as zingers, one-line zingers that are just a big yikes.
Yeah, he's trying to be funny, but it just ends up like playing into racism rather than, yeah.
He's making fun of the wrong person.
Yeah.
But like you said, it doesn't come up too much. And it was written in 89. I don't know.
I'm willing to give Pratchett a little bit of leeway because I think that as he continues writing the series, he gets better about realizing that that's not funny, it's just racist.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still call it out.
Absolutely. I mean, he clearly noticed it, so we're not wrong to notice it.
One thing that I also noticed, probably given that we just recently discussed American Hippo with Hannah and Laura from Our Pod, or on Wednesdays we read, was there were a lot of hippos in this book.
There were so many hippos in this book. I definitely found that way more charming than I would have in any other situation. But that's just an example of every reader brings something different to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, the hippos were, well, for me at least, the hippos were really exciting. I don't think live hippos show up in this book. It's just statues of hippos.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
There's a lot of crocodiles.
Yeah, the hippos are very background. They're not important in any way.
But they're also constant, and that was nice.
Mm-hmm.
I got some hoppers around. I will say on this reading, I made the connection that Pratchett connects sunrise and religion an awful lot.
I mean, a lot of times religion talks about what religion is doing to make the sun rise.
That's true. I mean, that's a good point. But he really leans on that metaphor and turning it into a concrete issue or example in a lot of his books. And I think maybe because that is such a visual and also universal experience.
But also, especially in this book, because it is a play on fantasy Discworld Egypt and Egyptian gods, there, it makes sense that there's a lot of talk about correlating sunrise and religion.
It does make sense. And it makes sense every time he brings it up. I just don't think I realized how often that's sort of his keystone metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
Or anti-metaphor, because he makes it a real thing. But that he uses that as his sort of touch point for all of the other magical shenanigans that are happening, but this is the one that sort of binds it together and that we use as like a temperature check for the state of the world. If the sun is rising, everything's fine. And that shows up in a couple of different books, but it doesn't feel repetitive because he is approaching it from such different mythological angles.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, this is the Egyptian mythology. The other one I'm thinking about is, of course, The Hogfather, which is much more European.
The Hogfather is one of the books that I haven't reread recently, and it's not a book that I tend to reread frequently, so I can't comment on, or I can't yet comment on how religion and belief and the sun rising plays into that book.
Well, it's central. We'll just say that. That's funny because that's probably the one I am most familiar with.
You've always gravitated to the death books a lot more than I do.
That's true. And also Christmas. It's just a good combo for me.
Yeah, I'm not really a Christmas person. It's fine, but...
One of the things that this book does that I love is that it sort of backwards maneuvers into science fiction. There's a lot of issues with time flow, and they just sort of accidentally discover quantum physics because of it, but it's magic. It's gods and pyramids and things. But
I mean, it's definitely still like a fantasy book. I don't think it ever veers into a science fiction book.
No, the characters use the word quantum to describe stuff. And I really love a fantasy book using science words to describe things as a opposite example for sci-fi books using fantasy words to describe things, which I feel like happens a lot.
Yes.
And so now we get to see kind of the other side of that.
It's a nice role reversal.
Mm-hmm.
Something that this book does that not very many of his other Discworld books do at all is that it has chapters. And it also has kind of like it plays with time in a way that I feel doesn't happen very often.
It worked well. The whole book was about time.
Yes. So.
The narrative flash back and forth between Tepek's current day versus sort of his childhood and upraising at the beginning. I made this connection literally while I was saying this sentence, but it makes a lot of sense because the book then goes to play with time in this more catastrophic way of people looping back in on themselves. And there's that one family where there's 40 versions of the suns at once. Like, there's a lot of time dilation nonsense. And so the book itself, with the narrative structure dealing with time, I think really fits with the story it's telling.
Yeah, that's not a point that I had considered before. I was just thinking, I kind of like it. But I think you're right that he probably made that structural choice with the idea in mind that this book was going to play with ideas of time.
He also names the sections after things that I recognize as being vaguely caricatures of Egyptian culture. There's one that's the Book of the Dead.
Yeah. I tend not to pay attention to segment headings or chapter names or things. Yeah. I mean, the Book of 101 Things a Boy Can Do, I think that's a play on English stuff.
Yeah, yes. But there is also a section called the Book of the Dead.
Yes.
Which I know is in The Mummy. And so I vaguely relate to Egypt stuff, but I
believe that there is a Book of the Dead.
Okay. I would not be surprised if they made it up for that movie, is all I'm saying. My understanding of Egypt mythology is definitely restricted to pop culture garbage.
I had an ancient Egyptian phase when I was younger, but that was a long time ago. I am no longer younger.
And the information we had access to when we had our young obsessions is still not necessarily super accurate.
That's very true, too.
Because I had my ancient Greek mythology phase, which does kind of come up in this book a little bit. But now revisiting it as an adult, the sources I am finding are super different. Oh, man. Okay, before we start talking about all of the puns.
They were good puns, though.
Oh, I know. We're going to talk about all of the puns.
Or some of the puns, anyway.
That's true. The ones that stood out enough for us to note them down. Should we give a quick high level, what the hell is this book?
Probably, and I'm going to vote that you do that, because you're much better at summaries than I am.
All right, Tepek lives in Ankh-Morpork, and this book starts with him doing his final exam to become an assassin because there's a guild of assassins, and I love that so much. It comes up more later, but this is kind of one of our first, like, really big tastes into that. And I still feel weird saying it because I don't love organized crime. I just love Discworld, okay? So Tepik is doing his exam to become a certified assassin. And he is also sort of flashing back to his youth growing up in Jelly Baby. This country in the desert where things are a little bit old-timey, even by Discworld standards. And through the book, we discover that he is actually the prince of Jelly Baby, and the king...
I don't know if I would say through the book. Like, he's established as the prince pretty early on.
All right, through the intro. And he is eventually called back because his father dies, and that's obviously, they need a king, especially because the king is a manifestation of a god on Earth who makes the sun rise, which is very important, obviously. So he returns home and is maybe more modern than everyone else there, and begins planning the pyramid for his late father, except he doesn't actually have any power. Everything is run by the high priest, and that was extremely frustrating for me to read about, but I think that was it was on purpose. It was supposed to be frustrating. Yeah.
That's the point.
Oh, but the high priest sucked so hard.
He sucks as a person, but as a character, I love him.
But you still expect me, if I am expected to read this book, you gotta give me something fun. And there is a big chunk in the middle where it's just all miserable and he sucks, and that's all that's happening.
I disagree. I mean, are you saying that that's all that's happening with the Dios, the priest, or that's all that's happening in the book and there's nothing else fun going on?
No, there's really just like a couple chapters, and it is establishing that as the status quo, but it goes on so long that I was a little miserable reading about it.
Oh.
Which is good because Tepik was also miserable.
I didn't have that problem.
Oh.
I was not miserable reading any of it.
It just frustrated me, and it was supposed to frustrate me. It did its job. Okay. So we discover that pyramids in this country of Jelly Baby, which I am going to repeat 100 times because it's pretty silly, absorb and then release time energy. This is a fantasy book. There is not a good description or understanding of this on a science level, except that the architects designing the pyramids say, oh, that's quantum. All of time getting absorbed and then discharged. Yeah, that's quantum. And then Tepik has to deal with the fallout from that, which I feel like the rest of it would be spoilers.
Yeah, he has to deal with the ramifications of being king, being powerless, and building this pyramid.
But before all of that, during his assassination exam, this is going to be a segment where we just read quotes at each other, but that's because they're good. All right, the first one is mine.
Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, no. Okay, Tepik is in the middle of his assassination exam. He discovers that there are caltrops on the floor of this room. He thought for a while. He had slip-on priests in his pouch. They were devilish things to prowl around a room in, but he shuffled into them anyway. Priests were metal-reinforced overshoes. They saved your souls. This is an assassin joke. And it was funny, and then we got to this is an assassin joke, and I could not contain the giggles. It was excellent.
It's just like that deadpan delivery, in as much as you can have a delivery in a book.
It was the meta of, hey, here is this joke calling these foot guards priests because they save your souls, which is a dumb pun. But then making fun of that for being an assassin joke was just so good.
It's very good. My quote that I'm going to read out is not an assassin joke, but Tepik and his friends have graduated successfully, and they have gotten themselves very, very drunk, and they're walking through the bad part of town, or a bad part of town, and they're being followed by some unsavory characters. Broadly, therefore, The three, even now lurching across the deserted planks of the brass bridge, were dead drunk assassins, and the men behind them were bent on inserting the significant comma. And Pratchett is just so good with wordplay.
Dead drunk.
Yeah, dead, drunk, assassins.
All right, our last pun for the evening. Tepic is back in Jelly Baby, and he is exercising his assassin skills by climbing around. There was a guard standing just outside the room. Tepic drifted past him and climbed carefully up the wall. It had been decorated with a complex bas-relief of the triumphs of past monarchs, so Tepic used his family to give him a leg up. Okay, it's not a pun. This last quote, I think, is a very good... It's a thread I don't think I realized until I had gotten to this book. But the Discworld novels vary wildly. They have different settings on the Discworld. They are satirizing wildly different source material. But one of the common themes throughout all of them has been criticizing the old guard, the people who are saying, but this is how we've always done it. And there is a very good quote in Pyramids that illustrates that and kind of made me clue in. Like, I don't think I had noticed it, but I don't think I realized how ubiquitous through Pratchett's work it was until I had gotten to this point.
It's not necessarily spelled out quite as clearly in any of the other books as it is in this book through this quote.
So the pyramid architects are a family business, and the father is thinking, you scrimped and saved to send them to the best schools, and then they went and paid you back by getting educated. And that is hilarious, first of all, but also really does just sort of really fit in with, I would say, maybe the only universal theme in Pratchett's work, that just because you've always done it doesn't make it good.
Yeah. And it's something that's still very appropriate. Like, it feels fresh and modern today. That quote is applicable to modern society still. Or certain segments of modern society.
Paid you back by getting educated. It's so good. Okay. Sarah, I'm going to say, when should you read this book? But I quite liked this book. I don't think it gives you a great example of Discworld as a whole, because this country within Discworld is not really explored much after this. However, from a fantasy hijinks combined with philosophical satire, I think this would be a pretty good place to start.
I think it's a decent place to start. It might not be my choice of where you would start, but if you start here, you could do worse.
I think we both kind of overlooked it during earlier conversations, but it hits a lot of the high points that Pratchett does really well. And it doesn't have some of the, well, it still has some dated issues, like we mentioned with some of the racism, which later Pratchett is better about, but it doesn't have some of the pitfalls of some really maybe lazy relationship work from his earlier books.
If you're looking for a good standalone novel to start off with, and you're interested in satirical look at religion and belief and family, this is not a bad place to start.
And if you like Egyptian mythology, I wouldn't say it's super heavy in that, but there's definitely the veneer of that over it.
Yes.
So it could be fun. To avoid spoilers for Pyramids, skip to 1:18:10. So you just mentioned satirizing religion.
Yeah, so this book does touch on religion and belief, and I bring that up partially because one of the later books, Small Gods, is very explicitly a book about exploring religion and satirizing religion. And I think in this, the religious discussion or the discussion of religion is kind of subsidiary to the plot, whereas Small Gods, like, that is the plot. But there is a lot of overlap.
I agree. Belief itself, I think, plays less of a role in this book than it does in some of his later books as a power source. But it definitely is maybe one of his earlier forays into religion as a concept and what do these concrete ideas look like? Or what do these abstract religious ideas look like if we treat them as concrete?
Mm-hmm.
Which actually, okay, it actually kind of really bothered me.
Oh, so?
There's a really weird contradiction there within this book. Because in Discworld, magic and gods are real, especially in Jelly Baby. But that's part of the question, right? The main character is trying to decide, does his father actually cause the sun to rise? So that's part of the joke. But we as readers, at this point in Discworld, know that the gods do exist. Magic does exist. So when this book, characters in this book, but also the book itself, treats pious characters as absurd, it kind of hits wrong to me.
I disagree there slightly because I think that it's not that the book is treating it's not treating piety in itself as absurd. It's treating piety to the exclusion of anything else.
Okay, I think you're right. You changed my mind. It's treating ceremony as ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because I'm remembering one of the characters at the beginning of the book who was one of Tepik's classmates who had a whole ceremony for praying every day. It involved a bunch of symbols he had to write on the floor and a goat to sacrifice. It was extremely over the top. It was ceremonial. And he thought if he didn't do this every evening, his god would literally pull out his entrails. Of course, he didn't. And so that was kind of one of the first questioning moments for Tepik of, okay, well then maybe my dad doesn't actually cause the sun to rise. But I do remember reading that and the classmates digging into this character and the character being treated as sort of weak for being upset by this. But if I lived in a world where magic and gods were real, I wouldn't want to take the risk.
I mean, and these are also like 12-year-old boys who are not known for being bastions of sympathy and self-awareness.
Yeah, the characters being mean were fine. Yeah. It felt like the book was also, like the narrative itself was saying, isn't this boy being silly?
I think that that's like I said, I think that's poking fun at not religion, but religion to the exclusion of anything else.
Yeah, I think your description actually flipped me on that. But I still wanted to bring up my point.
Yes.
At the time of reading it, that felt bad.
Mm-hmm. That also goes back to the theme that we were talking about the old guard and tradition for tradition's sake.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of ties into this concept of belief, which comes up in this book, as we mentioned, maybe not in the same concrete way as it does in some later works of Discworld. But one of the main plot points is that at around the halfway point of this book, all of the non-Egyptian gods become extremely real. People look up in the sky and there's an actual woman in the stars instead of just, oh, the sky is a lady. And it freaks everybody out.
Well, and it's really fun because there are a lot of differing beliefs as to who makes the sun go up and what the stars really are. And so you have all of these different aspects in the same place.
But all of these characters are confronted with the idea that, sure, they believed all of this was true, but seeing it is kind of worse. Especially in regards to the priests. The high priests of all these gods were extremely upset.
Well, because the gods are just ignoring, all of their priests and doing their own thing. Which there's a quote about how if you're praying to make the sun rise, like it's a good chance that God's going to hear your prayer and the sun's going to rise. But if you want direct intervention into something concrete in your life, that might be a little bit harder to manage.
But all of these priests who have committed their lives to worshipping these gods are now faced with them not as abstract concepts, but as physical realities, and it's very hard for them.
There's a quote on page 61 about how actually for a priest, you don't want to believe that hard. Dios, first minister and high priest among high priests, wasn't a naturally religious man. It wasn't a desirable quality in a high priest. It affected your judgment, made you unsound. Start believing in things, and the whole business became a farce.
Well, I think that's also a comment on how religion in historical cultures served a purpose beyond just faith and spirituality. There was this huge concept of social services and administration and even politics that religious orders served. And that's obviously been codified differently in today's government system, depending on the country you live in. But I would say in most places, the church probably plays a little bit less of an administrative role than it used to. I think that's safe to say. But they really were just sort of, heads of state, especially in this world.
Yeah, and you don't want, if you are fanatical about your beliefs, it doesn't make for a good administrator.
Except Dios was fanatical about his beliefs.
And he's not a good administrator.
Yeah, absolutely. Except his beliefs were not so much in the gods, but in how things have always been done. But still a fanatic in that way.
Yeah. I mean, he's not great with change.
His character's like, what's the Good Omens quote? Slow mosey downwards.
Yeah.
Is so good.
I absolutely love the reveal that he's not just, the evil high priest, but there's a little bit more to him than just the trope. And the slow discovery of that throughout this book is just perfect.
Even if it's very frustrating to get there. Maybe this is just like personal sensitivities, but the powerless feeling that Tepic had, that I had reading about Tepic, literally saying one thing. There were so many scenes where Tepic was giving decrees as the new king, and Dios said, "Oh, the king meant that." Dios
is the voice of the king and interprets, and his interpretation that he's giving to people who are in the same room as Tepic, who theoretically heard what Tepic said, is just so drastically different.
Yeah, and that's the absurd degree that Pratchett is taking it to. But the feeling that he didn't even want to say anything because he was worried it would, kill somebody is that, maybe that's just like a personal deep fear of having absolutely no control over your destiny. Not even just destiny, but goddamn day-to-day life.
I mean, it definitely sucked. I don't want to say it didn't suck. I don't think that I had as much trouble reading about it as you did, but it certainly was not great for Tepic, and he was understandably frustrated with it.
Oh yeah. It's hard for me to read scenes like that and not think, just make a scene. Just stand up and start cursing and take off all your clothes and run out naked. What's he gonna do with that?
But I think that Tepic considers that, or maybe not quite in those drastic of terms, but he comes to the conclusion that it wouldn't change anything.
Yeah. I mean, and then he disappears and then it doesn't change anything. So he wasn't wrong.
He wasn't wrong.
But his way of fighting back. Okay, here's one of the reasons why I think this is one of the best written Discworld novels we've gotten to so far. I did really love how Tepic's skills as an assassin were sort of brought back into the book. It starts with him learning to be an assassin, and then he finds himself constrained by the norms back home. So he can sneak past the guards. He can pick the locks on the jail cells of people he didn't intend to sentence to jail, because Dios was willfully and purposefully misinterpreting everything he said. It felt very like Chekhov's gun kind of thing, where we were given his training in the beginning, and then it actually was relevant at the end of him pulling off all these things. Even the end of the whole book, he has to climb to the top of a pyramid to let all of this extra temporal power discharge so that the whole freaking country can resume existing. And he was able to do that because of his assassin skills. And so that felt very fulfilling in a way. I think it shows Pratchett growing as a writer.
We spend so much time seeing him become an assassin or like pass the test to graduate that if that had not been relevant at all, it would have been kind of a waste of pages.
Well, sure, yes. But it could have been, oh, he had just been off doing something else, and then he came back, and then the whole book would have continued. But because what he was off doing came back to be part of the solution of the book, that felt very well constructed. Mort, not to pick on Mort, being a grape farmer had nothing to do with Mort the book, but that was his background.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're coming around to say the same thing from different angles.
Tepic does spend a lot of time in Ankh-Morpork that we as readers get to see, and it not only comes back from a plot perspective, but it also informs quite a bit about his character.
It's an interesting exploration, I think, of nature versus nurture a little bit, and it doesn't come up, like it's not a major theme in the book, but it is explored because Tepic spends the first couple of years of his life, you know, in Jelly Baby, and then he goes to Ankh-Morpork, and he has a quote at one point when he's back in Jelly Baby about he's talking with Tracy, and we'll talk about Tracy in just a minute. You're absolutely right, he said. I never thought about it. Where I come from, it rains nearly every day. I'm sorry. And Tracy's like, what? You're from Jelly Baby. It doesn't rain. She doesn't even know the word rain, at least in that context, in the context of water falling from the sky. And Tepic says, where I come from is Ankh-Morpork. Where I started from is here. And I just thought it was interesting to see the effect of living in a place for so long on a person and a character.
I think it's very interesting that you used the phrase nature versus nurture, because the B plot in this book, if you will, is Tepic's father, who dies and is a ghost, and spends the entire time trying to communicate that he does not want all of this traditional shit for his, you know, funeral ceremony or whatever. And
he wants to be buried at sea.
Right. It felt to me kind of like a like father, like son. They didn't have any interaction. According to the book, Tepic's father like pats him on the shoulder when he's sending him off to go become an assassin, and that's the only physical contact they've ever had, or something ridiculous like that.
Tepic's father is very absent-minded when he is alive and is not a great parent.
So I would not call any of their similarities nurture, because I would not call him nurturing at all. But they both end up in the same place of these traditions are hindering us as a people. And I'm not saying that that's in their DNA, because that's ridiculous, but it is also sort of an interesting counterpoint to that these two men thrust into the same position come to the same conclusion and are battling with the same things at extremely different phases of their life or afterlife for some. None of that contradicts what you just said. I just thought...
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah.
And then having that counterpoint of Tepic going through things while he's alive and his father continuing to go through the same things that he had been through his whole life. And you kind of realize as a reader why Tepic's father was so disconnected from everything, because none of his decisions mattered. How could you be involved when you have a high priest who's contradicting everything you do?
Yeah.
There are two dirty jokes that we noted in this book, but it's Pratchett, so there's a lot. The first one is Tepic and Tracy, who we are going to talk about soon because she's pretty excellent. They are riding away on a camel, and Tepik says, "Are you all right?" he shouted above the wind. "I'm hanging on with my knees." "That must be very hard." "You get special training." Tracy is a handmaiden, quote unquote handmaiden, which is implied to be a sex worker of some kind. But then we also find out that Tracy is Tepik's half-sister, and so his father doted upon her more as a daughter. There's not that much weird incest in this book.
I mean, there's a little bit of weird incest in this book, but not in regards
not father-daughter,
to yeah, not in regards to Tracy and Tepik's father, or Tracy and her father.
Right, but her training as a sex worker is obliquely referenced in ways like that.
The other dirty joke, although I feel like that's such a good segue into talking about Tracy.
You're right.
Let's talk about Tracy.
She was very interesting. So, I mean, there is sort of the romance between her and Tepik, but we do find out they're half siblings. But the whole book, they're trying to get Tepik to marry his aunt. So it kind of feels like the country itself does not have a problem with this.
I think the country itself, Jelly Baby would be happy if Tepik and Tracy got together, and Dios would be happy if they got together.
And Tepik would have been happy if they got together until he finds out that they were half-siblings.
Although he introduces her to one of his old friends after they are out of Jelly Baby, and he kind of expects that she and his friend are going to get along well, shall we say. And he doesn't know that they're siblings at that point.
No, well, because he has no claim on her, and what's he gonna do? Not introduce her to this guy? I feel like I'm gonna say romance. They don't actually get together, but they are definitely romantic interests through the main portion of this book.
I think there's an undercurrent. I don't know if it's quite as explicit as romantic interest makes it sound, but I think that there's definitely like oblique references to attraction.
But this relationship is so much more well developed than any of the ones I've seen from Pratchett so far.
At least in terms of romantic relationships, yeah.
Yes. Well, that's why I started by saying I'm going to call this a romantic relationship.
Yeah.
Because that's the context I'm talking about it in. She is an interesting character, trained as a handmaiden for the Pharaoh. I don't think do they use the word Pharaoh? That's what he is. I think they do.
I think they just call him the king.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. They call him Pharaoh.
She's certainly trained as a sex worker, even though that's not the services she provides for the man who ends up being her father. And as she sort of escapes the confines of Jelly Baby, she becomes extremely outspoken and opinionated in a way that is extremely satisfying for me as a reader, at least.
She has room to allow her intelligence to show and develop.
But she is still a sex symbol. She is allowed to be both at the same time, which I thought was very well done. She's often described as being scantily clad and using her presence as a weapon, her sexuality, her effect on people, as a way to advantage herself. There was one moment that didn't hit well for me.
Mm-hmm.
They are on what is effectively a pirate ship, and she walks up to one of the lackeys and is noticing his tattoos, which are lewd and athletic sex acts. And through this whole book, men have been ogling her and affected by her presence, and I think she was literally described as wearing less clothing than a postage stamp. She's definitely been sexualized as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
But then these characters, these other men on this pirate ship, have a woman come up and go, "Oh, that sex act is actually physically impossible. Haha, that's funny." And they all freak out and make this guy put on a long sleeve shirt. Because it's totally fine for him to have a sex act depicted between a man and a woman on his body, but the second a woman is in on the joke, it becomes uncomfortable to them. I do think Pratchett was making fun of those guys, though.
I do think that that's intentionally poking fun at the kind of person who becomes uncomfortable when they receive the treatment that they themselves are giving to other people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, oh no, how dare a woman ogle something on a man's body?
That is about a woman. Like, to me, that I think was the cherry on top. Is that
the tattoos involved men and women in them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously. They're diagrams of sex acts. There's
no obvious about that.
No, that's true. But I think earlier on, there have been other references to what I'm assuming is the Kama Sutra, but not exactly.
He has images from the Ankh-Morpork Kama Sutra, basically.
And it's been established that Tracy's grandmother was the model for this book.
Yeah, and Tracy has read it, and Tepik has read it, and it's come up previously.
But this whole group of pirates thinks it's so great and funny that he has these explicit sex acts tattooed on his body until, I don't know. I don't want to take this too far. It does annoy me when jokes can be made at a woman's expense, but if she dare participate, it's no longer funny. I don't think that's where Pratchett was going with it. So I don't want to go on a rant.
Yeah, I don't think that that's what he was going for.
I think that's what he was making fun of, frankly.
Yeah.
So poor Tracy, love that she ends up being king. Love that they call her king. That's also really good. And I really do want to say, I think Tepik and Tracy have more chemistry than any other couple in previous Discworld novels.
I have to agree with you there.
They don't even end up together, and they still have better chemistry. Pratchett's growing as a writer. It's wonderful.
It is. It's nice to see that he's getting better at writing these romantic or pseudo-romantic relationships. Because it's, again, their relationship is not ever overtly romantic. There's hints.
Right.
But
she reminded me a little bit of the character in The Color of Magic, the Virgin Sacrifice, who not Conan the Barbarian saves.
Bethan or something.
Oh yeah, Bethan. That's right. It's sort of a similar...
Playing on a similar, not trope, but like pastiche or...
Yeah, and then trying to evolve the character past that, but I think what Pratchett was trying to do with Bethan, he succeeded with in Tracy.
Yes, he also has more time with Tracy than with Bethan.
Yeah.
But he has gotten better as a writer and is just able to do more with the character than he could earlier.
Even just her dialogue with Tepik, Tracy's dialogue with Tepik, is really good banter.
Mm-hmm.
She actually has an opportunity to banter, which you're right is maybe a page count issue.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's exclusively a page count issue, but I think it is partially a page count issue, and it also is Tracy and Tepik are main characters, and Bethan and Cohen are not. So they get more screen time.
Bethan did have dialogue, and it was all pretty boring and expository.
Yeah.
Whereas now I am getting to see, I think Tracy is what he wanted Bethan to be, and he accomplished it here. Oh boy, is it time for me to complain about this bad romance novel some more?
I know that there is one complaint in particular that you have about this novel.
It is calling back to my issues with the book as a whole, also the characters in the book, being so shy about the existence of sexual relations between consenting adults. And it ends up using a lot of euphemisms. This particular complaint that I have is in dialogue, which I should acknowledge, yes, that is the character speaking, but it's pretty indicative of the book as a whole. Like, the whole book has this sort of tone to it of using cutesy words, which makes me vomit in my mouth a little bit. Especially when one character, so sisters, like I said, this is all family drama, and the main character is dealing with her family being over involved in her life and I'm supposed to find that charming and a good thing, according to the end of the book, is not a good book. Her older sister asks her if she needs time to do kittenscaping, referring to getting ready for a date. She, of course, means shaving her junk, but used the literal worst euphemism I have ever heard in my entire life.
That is, man, that's sure a euphemism.
I am aware that the phrase sex kitten exists. I don't like that it does. I prefer no one to ever use it. But leave cats out of this.
I also wouldn't. I mean, now that you've made the connection to sex kitten, I can link the two, but I would not have made that connection on my own.
I actually... making use of the explicit tag. I assume the phrase kittenscaping is referring to the slang term pussy. I think that makes more sense from a concrete diction standpoint.
That does make more sense.
It's also awful.
Yeah.
Like, I understood what they meant, did not like it one bit. These were two fucking adults who were being, like, cutesy and shy about referring to, your bikini area. I don't know. There are less gross euphemisms for it, okay?
That too, but also I probably, if I had a sister who was getting ready for a date, I probably wouldn't ask if she was going to shave her bikini line.
Well, that was also, her family is like super toxic and over-involved in her life, and I'm supposed to find that to be a good thing, which is why this book bothered me quite a bit.
Yeah, asking about some levels of preparation for the date, fine, whatever, but I don't need to know about my siblings' shaving habits, at all.
Maybe we're the wrong audience for this because neither of us have siblings.
No, but you and I are basically siblings.
I would not ask you that question. It's true.
I would not ask you that question. And it's not that we
aren't over-evolved in each other's lives.
And I was going to say, it's not like we are uncomfortable asking each other explicit things.
That's true.
Like, we have had explicit conversations, but that's still not a question I would ever ask before you were getting ready for a date.
No.
Like, I don't need to know about that. I'm sorry. And I certainly don't need to call it kittenscaping.
That just bothers me so much. It really does just boil down to leave the kittens out of this. They didn't ask to be involved in your weird sex-shamey, like, we all want to enjoy sex, but we can't admit it, so we're going to use gross words to talk about it situation. I don't know. I have cats. So why would you shave my cat? Leave them alone. And that's all I can think of.
It's an odd choice.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.